Human Rights Watch has accused the M23 militia of carrying out ethnically targeted mass killings in Eastern DR Congo after a US-brokered preliminary peace deal was signed. The rights group says the Rwanda-backed militia executed more than 140 civilians, among them women and children, citing eyewitness accounts. M23 has denied the claims. The militia group and the DRC have been working on reaching a final peace accord, which was supposed to have been signed on Monday, but so far no agreement could be made. Well, for more, we can talk to the lead researcher of that report, Clementine de Montjoye, from the African division at Human Rights Watch. Thanks very much for joining us. The killings that are documented in your report happened shortly after the US-brokered preliminary peace deal was signed in Washington. Both your report and UN figures suggest violence has escalated since then. Is the peace deal failing?
Thanks for having me. I think we can definitely say it's at risk of failing before it's even really started. The abuses that we've documented, the mass killings of civilians, primarily ethnic Hutu civilians, paint a really worrying picture in terms of the situation for civilians on the ground in Eastern Congo, and really throw into sharp focus the gap that exists between rhetoric in Washington or Doha and the reality on the ground. What we've documented is that throughout July, between July 10th and 30th, M23 blocked off entire areas where farmers and their families were working and laboring in fields, and executed over 140 people. Now, as you said, the UN has also documented the abuses and says over 300 civilians were executed, and we have other sources on the ground that claim that this is credible. Now, these could be some of the worst abuses by M23 since the group's resurgence, and they really highlight the need for any peace discussion or peace agreement to have a mechanism in place and a focus on accountability, and making sure that commanders that are responsible for these types of abuses are investigated and, when appropriate, prosecuted.
So in your view then, what implications does this continued violence have for the prospects of lasting peace?
This latest US agreement comes on decades of conflict in Eastern Congo, and civilians have borne the brunt of the violence for many, many years. And unless the agreement tackles this issue of abusive commanders, abuses against civilian populations, then it does risk becoming yet another footnote in a long list of failed agreements that have attempted to tackle the conflict in Eastern Congo. The agreement contains provisions and oversight mechanisms that really should be used to trigger investigations into allegations of this kind. And the agreement also contains provisions on the neutralization of the FDLR, which is an armed group operating, a mostly Rwandan Hutu armed group opposed to the Rwandan government, and M23 operating in the area. And it needs to be made very clear by the oversight mechanisms, as well as those negotiating or mediating the peace agreement, that any war crimes committed or crimes against civilians committed in the process of any anti-FDLR operations will not be tolerated and will lead to sanctions and other actions.
Your report, this Human Rights Watch report, directly accuses Rwanda of backing M23's operations. That's a claim that Rwanda denies. Can you tell us more about the evidence that you gathered to support that claim?
Yeah, so witnesses on the ground and people who survived the killings spoke about the presence of Rwandan soldiers, as well as giving detailed information on the M23 chain of command. They identified the RDF soldiers through their uniforms and their accents. And this was also confirmed by the UN in their statement on these killings, as well as other military sources. But Rwanda's support for the M23 is no secret. It's been well documented and established by Human Rights Watch, the UN panel of experts on Congo, and others who've provided information, aerial photographs, and a huge amount of evidence showing the critical role that Rwanda is playing in supporting M23 and what critical role that support played in the M23's offensive that allowed it to capture huge swaths of territory earlier this year. Rwanda's support for the M23 also means that Rwandan commanders can be held criminally liable for abuses committed by the M23.
If we focus now on civilians, the people that are suffering these atrocities, what needs to be done to protect the civilian population on the ground?
So the peace agreement contains provisions also on the protection of civilians, and the parties have agreed to protection of civilians and also allowing the UN peacekeeping force, MONUSCO, freedom of movement in order to be able to access areas to carry out their mandate. So that would be a first important step that needs to take place. A lot of people that we spoke with have also had to flee the area and telling us that they're not able to even feed themselves. So we've documented cases where people return to their fields either to search for loved ones who were missing or also to search for food and were then killed. So there needs to be immediate humanitarian assistance that's provided to these areas, as well as adequate medical assistance for the injured.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Clementine de Montjoye, Senior Researcher at Human Rights Watch, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.